Many of you have probably heard this name since you were a child. Maybe you have seen illustrations of a large ark full of animals or watched a cartoon about this story. But I believe that after listening to this video, you will see Noah's story in a whole new light, deeper, more real, and closer to our lives. This is not simply a story about a man building a giant ark. This is not just a story about a great flood or animals traveling in pairs. This is a story about faith, about trusting God when the world around you thinks you have lost your mind. This is a story about perseverance, about continuing to do the right thing when everyone is against you. This is a story about faith, about believing in the unseen and acting on God's promises. Do you ever feel like you are standing alone? Have you ever believed in something that no one else believed in? Have you ever felt like God was calling you to do something that everyone around you thought was crazy? If so, then Noah's story will touch your heart. Today, we will explore not only the events that took place, but also the emotions, the inner struggles, and the real-life challenges that Noah and his family faced. We will put ourselves in their shoes, trying to understand what they were going through. I invite you to prepare yourself for a long journey, but I guarantee that by the end of the video, you will feel encouraged, inspired, and most importantly, more confident in God's wonderful plan for each of us. To understand Noah's story, we must first go back to the times in which he lived. According to Bible scholars, Noah lived around 4000 BC, during what the Bible calls the pre-flood era. The world was very different then. There were no large cities like we see today, no modern technology, no developed means of transportation. People lived mainly on agriculture and herding animals, concentrated in small communities scattered all over the place. But most importantly, this was an era that the Bible describes in very serious terms. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Imagine a society where morality had declined to such a degree, a society where violence was the norm, a society where deceit, greed, and selfishness were considered normal, a society where people no longer care about God, no longer worship Him, and live as if He does not exist. The Bible says that the earth was filled with violence. This means that not just a few individuals were evil, but the entire social system was corrupt. The leaders, corrupt religion, unjust legal systems, the strong bullying the weak, and no one caring about justice or mercy. We can compare it to some of the darkest periods in human history, times when might was justice, when conscience was ignored, when basic moral values were disregarded. But even those times cannot compare to the level of depravity that the Bible describes in Noah's time. And in the midst of this, there was a man named Noah. The Bible describes him in remarkable terms. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Can you understand what this means? In a society that was completely corrupt, there was one man who kept his conscience. In a world where everyone had turned their backs on God, there was one man who remained faithful. In an environment where morality was despised, there was a man who lived righteously. This was not easy. Noah did not live in a monastery isolated from the world. He lived in the community, had to interact with people around him, had to buy and sell, do business, raise children in a sinful environment. Perhaps every day Noah witnessed injustice. Perhaps his neighbors lived promiscuous lives. Perhaps at community gatherings he was the only one who did not participate in vulgar stories and vulgar entertainment. Perhaps he was considered strange, old-fashioned, out of step with the times. But Noah persevered. He walked with God, meaning he maintained a close relationship with God through prayer, worship, and obedience to God's word in daily life. One remarkable thing about this story is that Noah was not alone. He had a family, a wife and 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And they were all brought into the ark by God, which means they were also saved from judgment. This shows us that Noah's influence was not limited to himself. His way of life affected his entire family. His walking with God affected his wife and children. Think about raising children in a decadent society. How do you teach them the right values when you are surrounded by bad examples? How do you protect them from negative influences in the environment? I can imagine the conversations that took place in Noah's family. Son, why can't you play with A? Because I see that he has bad habits. But Dad, why do we have to be different from everyone else? Because we belong to God, son. We have to live God's way. Such conversations must have been common in Noah's family, and it seems that his wife and sons accepted this way of life, although it may not have always been easy. Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, must have had their own struggles. In a society where their peers were living freely, they had to restrain themselves. When their friends went places their families considered inappropriate, they had to say no. When people did things their families considered wrong, they had to stand aside. This certainly wasn't easy for the young men. There were probably times when they wondered why their family had to be so different. There were probably times when they felt isolated, different. But Noah's upbringing laid a solid foundation for his sons. When the time came, they all chose to go with their father into the ark. This shows that they trusted their father's leadership and also trusted God. Noah's wife was also an admirable woman. The Bible doesn't say much about her, but she certainly played an important role in building a God-fearing family in a decadent society. She probably had to endure gossip from the neighbors. She probably was considered too strict in raising her children. She probably was criticized for not allowing her children to participate in activities that other families considered normal. But she persevered. She supported her husband in maintaining moral principles. She helped create a healthy family environment in an unhealthy society. I think this is very important for us today. In an age where many moral values are being challenged, the role of the family becomes extremely important. The way Noah and his wife raised their children is an example for Christian families today. Then one day, Noah's life changed completely. God spoke to him. Can you imagine that moment? The creator of the universe, the one who created heaven and earth and all things, was speaking directly to a human being. According to the Bible, this was not the first time humans had heard God speak. We know that Adam and Eve had spoken to God in the Garden of Eden. Enos walked with God and was taken up into heaven by God. But in Noah's generation, hearing God speak must have been a very rare event. The Bible does not describe in detail how God spoke to Noah. It could have been through a voice heard. It could have been through a vision. It could have been through a deep spiritual touch. But either way, Noah knew for certain that God was speaking to him. The content of God's words is truly serious. I saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth. I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. Genesis 6-7. Imagine how Noah must have felt when he heard these words. God was announcing a global judgment. Not just a city, not a region, but the entire human race would be destroyed. But then came the part that shocked Noah. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6-8. In a world that deserved judgment, God found one person worthy of being saved. God not only announced judgment, but also offered a plan of salvation. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in it and cover it inside and out with pitch. Genesis 6:14. I can only imagine the look on Noah's face. A simple farmer, who had probably never seen the sea, was now being asked to build an ark, and not just a small basket, but a giant one. God gave specific specifications. This is how you are to build the ark. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Genesis 6:15. Do you know what those numbers mean? 300 cubits in antiquity is about 150 meters. That's the length of a football field and a half. 50 cubits is about 25 meters wider than a tennis court. 30 cubits is about 15 meters, as high as a 5-story building. This is a huge project, even by today's standards. In Noah's time, without modern machinery, this was simply an impossible project. But what moved me most about this entire conversation was Noah's response. He didn't argue, he didn't ask, "Why me?" He didn't say, "I don't know how." He simply obeyed. Noah did. He did everything God commanded him. Genesis 6:22. This is the first and most important lesson from Noah: complete obedience. When God calls, we don't have to understand everything. We don't have to see the whole picture. We just have to trust and obey. After receiving a mission from God, the first thing Noah did was share it with his family. And I can imagine that this was not an easy conversation. Put yourself in Noah's shoes. You've just received a message from God about the destruction of the entire world, and He wants you to build a giant ark in preparation for the great flood. How would you explain this to your wife and children? I can imagine the conversation. "Honey, I need to tell you something very important." "What is it?" "The Lord has spoken to you." Noah's wife must have noticed. She knew her husband was a God-fearing man, so God's words to him were not a complete surprise. What did the Lord say? The Lord said, ... He would judge the world with a great flood. Flood? Yes, the whole world will be flooded. But the Lord wants to save our family. How? He told me to build an ark. I thought, and the atmosphere in the house must have become quiet. Noah's wife might have looked at him with disbelief or worry or fear. "A ark? Where we're living in the middle of the land?" "Honey, I know this sounds ... strange, but this is the Lord's word." He gave me specific instructions. And then Noah had to explain the size of the ark. 150 meters long, 25 meters wide, 15 meters high. These numbers must have stunned the family. Noah's 3 sons had their own reactions. Shem, the eldest, was probably serious and supportive. Ham was probably more skeptical. Japheth, the youngest, was probably afraid. "Father, how can we build such a big boat? We are just farmers." "My son, with men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. God will give us strength and wisdom." There must have been long discussions in the family. There were probably questions, worries, doubts. But in the end, they all decided to trust Noah, and through him, God. This shows us the importance of leadership in the family. Noah was not only a man of faith, but also a husband and father who was able to pass that faith on to his family. But I also think that Noah's family did not believe completely from the beginning. Maybe they needed time to digest the information. Maybe they needed to see signs from God to strengthen their faith. "The Lord has spoken to you," Noah's wife must have noticed. She knew her husband was a God-fearing man, so God's words to him were not a complete surprise. What did the Lord say? The Lord said ... He would judge the world with a great flood. Flood? Yes, the whole world will be flooded. But the Lord wants to save our family. How? He told me to build an ark. I thought, and the atmosphere in the house must have become quiet. Noah's wife might have looked at him with disbelief or worry or fear. A ark? Where? We're living in the middle of the land. Honey, I know this sounds ... strange, but this is the Lord's word. He gave me specific instructions. And then Noah had to explain the size of the ark. 150 meters long, 25 meters wide, 15 meters high. These numbers must have stunned the family. Noah's 3 sons had their own reactions. Shem, the eldest, was probably serious and supportive. Ham was probably more skeptical. Japheth, the youngest, was probably afraid. "Father, how can we build such a big boat? We are just farmers." "My son, with men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. God will give us strength and wisdom." There must have been long discussions in the family. There were probably questions, worries, doubts. But in the end, they all decided to trust Noah, and through him, God. This shows us the importance of leadership in the family. Noah was not only a man of faith, but also a husband and father who was able to pass that faith on to his family. But I also think that Noah's family did not believe completely from the beginning. Maybe they needed time to digest the information. Maybe they needed to see signs from God to strengthen their faith. Noah probably had to sell many of his possessions. He probably had to sell his livestock, his land, his non-essentials. His family probably had to live in poverty to save money for the project. Finally, the day came to start construction. I can imagine the first morning. Noah's family gathered in the clearing, looking at the huge piles of wood, the prepared tools, and the blueprints they had drawn up. They probably started with a prayer. Noah probably asked God for strength, wisdom, and perseverance to complete the task. Then they set to work. The first job was to lay the foundation. They had to level the ground, create a solid foundation for the giant ship. From the very first days, they realized that this job was much harder than they had imagined. Moving tons of wood by hand was no joke. Getting the measurements right to make sure the boat was the right size was also extremely difficult. I can imagine Noah and his son trying to lift the huge log, their shirts soaked with sweat, their limbs shaking with fatigue. There were probably times when they had to rest because they were so exhausted. "Father, can we do it?" One of the sons might have asked. "Son, it's impossible with human strength, but God will help us," Noah might have replied. The first days were also when they started to attract the attention of the neighbors. At first, perhaps only a few curious people stopped by to watch. But when they saw the scale of the project, the news quickly spread. "Do you know what Noah is doing?" "I heard he's building a boat." "A boat? In the middle of the land?" "Yes, and it's huge. It's hundreds of meters long." "Is he crazy?" And so the curious people started to come. At first, they just stood at a distance and watched. But gradually, they gained the courage to come closer, ask questions, and make comments. Noah was in a difficult position. On the one hand, he wanted to work quietly. On the other hand, he also wanted to witness to God to those around him. Perhaps he tried to explain to them his mission. "Noah, why are you building the boat here? God told me there would be a great flood." "A flood? Here?" "Noah, we live hundreds of miles from the sea. God can do anything." Such conversations must have happened every day. And gradually, Noah realized that very few people believed what he said. Most thought he had lost his mind. If you think the technical challenges are difficult, the social pressures are even more formidable. When news of Noah's Ark spread, the community's reaction was not support or admiration, but ridicule and contempt. Put yourself in that situation. You live in a small community where everyone knows each other. And suddenly, a neighbor starts building a huge, bizarre structure, claiming that it is in preparation for an impending disaster that only he knows about. What do people think? At first, they are curious. Then they laugh. Then they start worrying about the person's mental state. Finally, they become annoyed and even hostile. Why? Because Noah made them feel uneasy. He spoke of God's judgment of an impending disaster. This forced them to face difficult questions about their own lives and their own morality. Instead of reflecting and possibly changing their ways, they chose the easier way, attacking the messenger. They called Noah a madman, a fanatic, a self-proclaimed prophet. "Hey, Noah, who do you think you are? Do you think God only talks to you?" "Noah, If the flood is really coming like you say, why doesn't God tell us all? You're just making a fool of yourself to get attention. These taunts were not only directed at Noah, but also at his family. Noah's wife probably had to endure contemptuous looks when she went to the market. Do you know what your husband is doing? Can you convince him to stop? He's making a fool of us all. Noah's 3 sons were not spared from criticism either. Friends shunned them, lovers may have left them. They were seen as accomplices of a madman. Why didn't you stop your father? Do you believe in that crazy flood story too? Your family is so weird. I can imagine the nights in Noah's family. There were probably times when his wife cried silently because of the social pressure. There were probably times when the sons wondered about their decision. Dad, why are people so against us? Son, when we follow God's way, the world will not understand. They live in darkness, so when they see the light, they feel uncomfortable. But the pressure didn't stop with words. Some threw rocks at the construction site. Some tried to destroy the project. Some threatened Noah's family. Noah, if you don't stop, we will make you stop. You are affecting the reputation of the whole community. We will not allow you to continue this madness. I think this was the most difficult challenge Noah faced. Not because the construction was too hard, but because of the psychological pressure from being opposed by the whole community. The feeling of loneliness, the feeling of being misunderstood, the feeling that the whole world was against you. These were very unpleasant emotions that anyone could understand. But Noah persevered. Every morning he woke up, he prayed, listened to God's voice in his heart, and continued his work. He knew that human opinions could be wrong, but God's word was never wrong. I do not believe that Noah never doubted. He was also human like us, had emotions, had times of fatigue, had times of doubt. And I think those moments of doubt were the most important moments in his journey of faith. One can imagine that late one night, after a long day of work and ridicule, Noah sat alone beside his unfinished ship. The moonlight shone down on the unfinished timbers. The night wind blew, carrying the sound of insects chirping in the distance. And in that silence, questions began to arise in Noah's mind. Lord, am I really listening to you? A year had passed since the project began. The ship was only partially completed. The work was much harder than they had expected. And most importantly, there was still no sign of the great flood. The sky was as blue as usual. The sun still shone every day. The rain still fell seasonally, not too much, not too little. Everything was going on as usual. Or is it all just an illusion? The mocking words of the neighbors began to creep into Noah's mind. Noah, where is the great flood? It's been a year. Did you get the date wrong? Maybe God said next year? Or maybe you heard wrong? Maybe God told you to build a house, not a boat? Those words, though meant as a joke, kept ringing in Noah's head. Sometimes, even in his most tired moments, he wondered if he had made a mistake. And it wasn't just the pressure from outside. Even within the family, I think there were times when members began to doubt. Noah's wife must have had sleepless nights. Honey, are we doing the right thing? Are you sure this is God's voice? What if ... what if we're wrong? We've spent so much money, time, and reputation. The same thing happened with the 3 sons. Perhaps there were private conversations among them. Do you believe, Dad? I don't know, it's been years and nothing's changed. What if Dad's wrong? What will happen to our lives? I think it's moments like that when faith is really tested. Not when things are going smoothly, not when there are obvious signs, but when things seem to contradict what we believe. How did Noah get through those moments? I think he had to go back to what he knew for sure. First, he remembered the moment God first spoke to him. He remembered the deep sense of peace he felt when he heard God's voice. He remembered the clarity of the message. He knew it was not an illusion. Second, he looked back at his life. He knew he was a righteous man who sought to do God's will in all things, so God's choice of him was not a surprise. Third, he remembered God's character. God does not change. God's promises do not change. If God has spoken, he will do it, even if it may not be in the time people expect. And most importantly, Noah learned the lesson of obedience without understanding. He did not need to see God's entire plan. He only needed to do the work God had given him. I can imagine Noah on his knees at night praying, "Lord, I am weak. There are times when I doubt, but I still believe that you have spoken to me. Please give me the strength to continue. Please give me the faith to get through these difficult times." And I believe that in those moments, God gave Noah words of comfort, little signs to encourage him to continue. Time passed, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The ark gradually took shape. From the scattered planks at first, now the shape of a giant ship could be seen. But there was still a lot of work to do. Not only did they have to build the hull, but they also had to create compartments, ventilation systems, and places to store food and water. Every detail had to be perfect because the lives of everyone on board would depend on it. According to the Bible, the ark had 3 floors. Imagine the complexity of the work. They had to create wooden floors for each floor. They had to create stairs to move between floors. They had to make sure the structure could withstand the weight of thousands of animals. Noah and his sons became expert carpenters. Their hands were calloused from holding tools day after day. Their skin was tanned from working outdoors. Their muscles were strong from lifting heavy logs. But it wasn't just the physical aspect. They became stronger mentally too. They learned to work as a team. They learned to persevere when faced with difficulties. They learned to trust each other and God. I can imagine the early mornings in Noah's family. They woke up before sunrise, prayed together, had a simple breakfast, and then went to work. "What are we going to do today, Dad?" "We're going to finish the 2nd floor today." "How long will it take?" "God will give us plenty of time. We just have to do our best each day." Over the years, the community's attitude toward them changed. At first it was curiosity, then ridicule, then anger. But as time passed and the ark grew larger, some began to feel ... fear. What if Noah was right? What if there really was a great flood coming? But instead of repenting and changing their ways, most people chose to deny it. They tried to find other reasons to explain Noah's actions. Maybe he just wanted to be famous. Maybe this is a new religion. Maybe he's moving somewhere else and needs transportation. But a few people began to take Noah's message seriously. They came to ask, "Noah, if what you say is true, what should we do?" "Repent and turn to God. Turn away from your wicked ways and live according to God's will." "But will we get on the ship?" "I don't know. God will decide." Such conversations must have taken place, but they were few. Most people still did not believe, still considered Noah a laggard. During this time, Noah's family also had to make other preparations. They had to collect and store food, not only for themselves, but also for the thousands of animals that would come on the ship. They had to learn about the eating habits of each animal. What do lions eat? How much food do elephants need each day? Where will we store the food? Questions like these continued, and gradually they realized that this was not just building a ship, but preparing for a long sea journey with thousands of special passengers. Then, after many years of perseverance, the first signs of a miracle began to appear. And the interesting thing is, these signs were not from the sky, but from animals. At first, there were only small changes. Some birds began to move in unusual directions. Some wild animals began to appear near the area where the ark was. Noah and his family were the first to notice these changes. They lived close to nature, so they knew what was normal and what was abnormal. "Dad, why are there so many strange birds today? Look, why is that fox circling the ark?" At first, Noah was not sure if this was a sign from God, but as the phenomena became more and more obvious, he began to understand. Then one day, the unbelievable happened. A pair of lions appeared and walked straight to the area where the ark was. They did not attack anyone, they simply came and waited. The news quickly spread throughout the community. People flocked to see. They couldn't believe their eyes. Why are there lions here? Where did they come from? Why aren't they attacking anyone? Why are they always near Noah's Ark? Then came the elephants. A herd of them appeared from the south, moving slowly but steadily toward the ship. The sight was truly shocking. Elephants were rare in the area, and it was unheard of for them to move to a specific location on their own. Noah watched the elephants with tears in his eyes. He knew that this was the sign he had been waiting for all these years. God was beginning to fulfill his promise. Look, family, God is at work. But the most amazing thing was not the appearance of the animals, but the way they behaved. Lions lay next to sheep without attacking. Wolves walked with goats. Snakes crawled next to rats without hunting. This was completely against their natural instincts. This sight caused many in the community to start thinking seriously. They could not deny what was happening before their eyes. This is not normal. Maybe Noah is right. Maybe something really is going to happen. But still, many people tried to find other explanations. Maybe Noah used bait. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's some natural phenomenon we don't understand yet. Meanwhile, the animals continued to arrive. Birds flew in from all over. Reptiles crawled up from the ground. Insects flew in groups. Fish from nearby streams also gathered in one direction. Noah knew that the time was near. He increased the speed of finishing the ark. The last details had to be completed. Ventilation systems, food storage areas, living quarters for each animal, everything had to be ready. Then one morning, as the sun was just rising, God spoke to Noah one last time before the great flood began. "Come into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. In 7 days I will make it rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And I will blot out from the face of the ground every living thing that I have made." Genesis 7:1-4. This moment must have been very moving for Noah. After years of waiting, the time had finally come. But along with the relief of confirmation, he must have felt sadness, knowing that the world he had lived in would soon be gone. Noah gathered his family and announced, "The time has come, the Lord has spoken. 7 days from now, the great flood will begin. We must go into the ark." This was perhaps the moment the family had waited for and feared the most. They had been preparing for years, but when the moment finally came, it still felt sudden and serious. They quickly packed up the last of their belongings. The most necessary things were taken aboard. The things that could not be taken were left behind with regret. Noah's wife must have cried as she left the house she had lived in for so many years. The keepsakes, the objects that had special meaning, all had to be left behind. The same went for the 3 sons. They were leaving behind their familiar lives, their friends, though not many, and everything they had ever known. But they were also excited. After so many years of being considered crazy, they would finally be proven right. After so many years of waiting, they would finally see the power of God manifest. Getting all the animals on board was a huge challenge. Imagine, thousands of animals, from giant elephants to tiny ants, all had to be arranged in an orderly manner on the ship. But the amazing thing was, they didn't have to be forced. They came in voluntarily. It was as if an invisible force was guiding them. Noah and his family simply opened the entrances and guided the animals to their rightful places. Each species had its own space, suitable for its needs. This scene was truly a parade of all kinds of creatures. Lions marched majestically. Giant elephants were slow but majestic. Birds flew in flocks. Reptiles crawled in rows. The villagers watched from afar, mouths agape in amazement. They had never seen a scene like this before. They couldn't deny that this was supernatural. This ... cannot be explained. How can Noah control all these animals? Maybe he's right. Some people began to worry. If Noah is right about the animals, maybe he's right about the flood. Should we prepare something? Should we ask Noah to let us on the ark? But it was too late. God had closed the door of opportunity. According to the Bible, the Lord shut the door of the ark. Genesis 7:16. This is a very powerful image. It was not Noah who closed the door, it was God who closed the door. This means that the decision about who would be saved was not made by Noah, but by God. Noah was simply the one carrying out God's plan. When the final door of the ark closed, inside there was everything needed for life. Outside was a world about to face judgment. I can imagine Noah's feelings at that moment. On the one hand, he felt relieved that he had finally accomplished his mission. On the other hand, he felt sad because he knew that many people would not be saved. For the first 7 days after Noah entered the ark, nothing happened. The sky was still blue. The sun was still bright. The wind was still cool. Everything was as normal as ever. And this was perhaps the final test of Noah's faith. He had entered the ark as God had said, but the great flood had not yet come. He and his family sat in the giant ark, surrounded by thousands of animals, waiting for what God had promised. Outside, the villagers were mocking him more and more. "Noah, where is the flood? You've been in the ark for 3 days. Why is the weather still so nice? Are you planning to stay in the ark forever? Get out, stop acting." These mocking words must have made Noah's family feel doubtful. Perhaps they wondered, did we enter the ark too soon? Did God say 7 days when it was really 7 weeks? Have we misunderstood something? But Noah still believed. He remembered that God's word was always right, even if people could not understand the timing. These days were also an opportunity for Noah's family to get used to life on the ark. They had to learn how to take care of thousands of animals. They had to establish eating, sleeping, working habits in a confined space. It is remarkable that the animals behaved very calmly. They did not attack each other, did not make noise, did not try to escape. It was as if they understood that they were in a safe place and needed to wait. Then came the 8th day. The morning began like any other. The sun rose, the birds sang, the breeze blew. The villagers went about their business as usual, many still making fun of Noah. But by midday, the first changes began to appear. At first, just a few clouds appeared in the blue sky, nothing unusual. Then the clouds began to gather quickly. From all directions, dark clouds moved in. The sky began to darken. The wind began to blow harder. At first, just a breeze, then a gale, then a storm. The trees began to shake. Dust flew everywhere. In the ark, Noah's family sensed these changes. The animals began to get restless too. They knew that something big was about to happen. "Here it is," Noah whispered. "Here it is." Then the first drops of rain began to fall. At first, just a few drops. Then it got heavier, then it poured. Then it rained as if someone had opened giant water taps from the sky. The Bible describes it. The fountains of the deep broke open, and the windows of heaven were opened. Genesis 7:11. It was not just rain from the sky, but water gushing from the ground. It was as if the whole earth was being torn apart. At first, the people were not too worried. They thought it was just an unusually heavy rain. They ran into their houses to take shelter, waiting for the rain to stop. But the rain did not stop. Day after day, the water continued to fall. It was not normal rain, but like waterfalls pouring from the sky. The water began to accumulate on the ground. At first, it was just small puddles. Then the rivers began to rise. Then the water began to overflow the fields and the roads. When people realized that this was not a normal rain, they began to panic. The water continued to rise with no sign of stopping. Families began to move from the lowlands to higher ground. They took with them the most necessary things, hoping that the rain would stop soon. But the rain did not stop. The water continued to rise. The houses in the lowlands began to flood. People had to climb onto the roofs to take shelter. At this point, some people began to remember Noah. Noah warned us about this. He said there would be a flood. The ark, we must get to the ark, but it was too late. God had closed the door. And now, with the rising waters and the strong winds, it was impossible to reach the ship. Some tried. They swam, they rowed, they tried everything to reach the ship, but the strong currents and the big waves swept them away. Inside the ship, Noah's family heard cries for help from outside. These must have been the most painful moments of their lives. They knew that there were people drowning outside, but they could do nothing to save them. "Father, can we open the door to save them?" "Son, God has closed the door." "No one can open the door but God." The cries for help gradually faded, then fell silent. The ship began to float. The first feeling of the ship floating must have been very strange. After years of standing still on dry land, they were now floating on water. The ship rocked gently with the waves, a completely new feeling. The water continued to rise. Not only did it flood the plains, but it also flooded the hills. The tallest trees were gradually submerged. According to the Bible, the waters rose exceedingly upon the earth, and every high mountain under the whole heaven was covered. Genesis 7:19. This was a global judgment, sparing no place. Life on the ship during the following months was not easy. Thousands of animals needed daily care. They needed food, water, and clean space. Noah's family had to set a strict schedule. Each person had specific tasks. Noah could be in charge of large animals like elephants and lions. The sons shared the care of different animals. Cleaning was a big challenge. With thousands of animals, the amount of waste produced every day was huge. They had to have a system to handle and maintain cleanliness on the ship. Food was also an issue. Even with all the preparation, distributing the right kind and amount of food to each animal every day was complicated. Then there were the psychological challenges. Living in a confined space with thousands of animals, not being able to go outside, not knowing when they would be able to return to land. All of this can be very stressful, but Noah's family got through it with faith and togetherness. They prayed together every day. They reminded each other of God's promises. They believed that God would get them through this difficult time. The amazing thing was that the animals also behaved very calmly. It was as if they understood that this was a special situation and that they needed to cooperate. Species that would normally attack each other in the wild now lived peacefully side by side. Finally, after 150 days on the water, the ship stopped at Mount Ararat. The water began to recede. The top of the mountain began to appear. Noah sent out a raven, then a dove to scout out the situation outside. When the dove brought back a fresh olive leaf, Noah knew that dry land had begun to appear. Then one day, God said to Noah, "Come out of the ship." Genesis 8:16. The moment of setting foot on dry land after more than a year on the ship must have been very touching. The fresh air, the sunshine, the solid feel of the land underfoot, all were like precious gifts. The first thing Noah did when he got out of the ship was to build an altar and offer a sacrifice to thank God. He did not forget that his family was saved by God's grace. And God made a covenant with Noah. I will never again curse the ground because of man. I will never again destroy all living things as I have done. Genesis 8:21. The sign of this covenant was the rainbow, a reminder of God's mercy. Dear friends, Noah's story is more than just an ancient historical event. It is a timeless lesson about faith, obedience, and trust in God's plan. Noah teaches us that sometimes doing God's will means going against popular opinion. It means being considered strange, even crazy. But what was the result of obedience? Noah and his family were saved. Those who refused to believe were destroyed. Today, you may be facing a difficult decision. Maybe God is calling you to do something that people around you don't understand. Maybe you feel alone, as if you are the only one who believes in it. Remember Noah. Remember that when we obey God, no matter how hard it is, He will eventually prove His word right. Faith is not believing when you see it. Faith is believing when you see it. Noah believed God's promise when not a drop of rain had fallen, and in the end, he saw God's saving power. Thank you for patiently listening to this story. I hope it has encouraged you in your faith journey. Remember, with God, nothing is impossible. And when He calls, we just have to trust and obey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on this story. We will see you in the next video. God bless you.